dark where secrets fall.
Welcome, weary listeners, to Sleepy Horror Tales. Tonight, we embark on a chilling journey into the story of the Linh Estate, a place where the boundary between the living and the restless dead blurs. This isn't merely a tale of ghosts and curses. It's a deep dive into the darkness that festers within the human heart, where greed and betrayal weave a tapestry of terror more haunting than any specter. Prepare yourselves, for the Linh Estate whispers secrets best left undisturbed, and tonight we shall heed its mournful call. Have you ever wondered if the most terrifying things are those that are visible, or rather the phantoms within our souls, the obsessions we create ourselves? Tonight's story will give you an answer, but be careful, for when the doors of the past are opened, the most horrific things can find you. The old Linh Estate was a local landmark, a sprawling property that whispered of a bygone era. It wasn't a mansion in the American sense, more like a collection of connected, traditional-style homes with tiled roofs and long, shaded walkways, all clustered around a central courtyard. Behind the main house was a small, overgrown vineyard, a remnant of the family's past. The property's matriarch, Mrs. Linh, was a woman known for her rigid adherence to old-fashioned values. Think a stern, Southern grandmother type, but with a distinctly Asian twist that most locals simply attributed to family tradition. Mrs. Linh, the eldest daughter, had inherited the estate due to her sharp mind and business sense. Her two younger brothers, known locally as Uncle Ba and Uncle Et, in Vietnamese cultural traditions, similar to calling an elder aunt or uncle even without direct relation, were less successful. They were amiable enough, but everything they touched seemed to turn to dust. Feeling responsible, Mrs. Linh had given each brother a house on either side of her own central dwelling. She'd helped them get married, settle down, and find stable, if unremarkable, jobs. She'd even provided them with furniture, sturdy beds, traditional screens, and enough land to keep them afloat. But Mrs. Linh herself never married. She was, to put it mildly, particular. Her strong personality and traditional expectations meant that no suitor ever quite measured up. Instead, she adopted a daughter, Lan, whom she doted on with a fierce, almost obsessive love. Lan was her treasure, her legacy. Mrs. Linh intended to mold Lan in her own image, a strong, independent woman who would inherit and manage the estate. She was fiercely protective, forbidding anyone, even family, from criticizing or upsetting Lan. This made Lan a somewhat difficult child. The other family members, including Uncle Ba and Uncle Et, learned to tread carefully around her. Lan was spoiled, prone to tantrums, and had a reputation for getting into fights with the neighborhood kids. She grew up enveloped in Mrs. Lin's unwavering protection, but also surrounded by a growing resentment from the other children and their families. As Lan entered her teenage years, her rebellious streak exploded. She demanded expensive things, throwing fits and breaking furniture if she didn't get her way. No one could control her, not even Mrs. Linh, who increasingly indulged her daughter's whims. Lan began partying, running with a fast crowd, and racking up debts. Word got around she was becoming infamous for her wild behavior and gambling habits. Several times, debt collectors came to the estate, forcing Mrs. Lin to bail her out, each time chipping away at the family fortune and Mrs. Lin's patience. Then came the final blow. Lan became pregnant. She'd been partying hard in the city, and the father was unknown. It was a classic story of youthful recklessness gone horribly wrong. The extended family, already weary of Lan's antics, saw this as the last straw. They urged Mrs. Lin to disown her, to cut her off for the sake of the family's reputation and dwindling resources. The ensuing confrontation was explosive. In a fit of rage and despair, Lan grabbed her motorbike and sped off into the night. It was a fatal mistake. She lost control and crashed into a utility pole, dying instantly. Mrs. Lin was devastated, her world shattered in a single, horrific moment. Lan's funeral was a strange, emotionally charged affair. Mrs. Lin was a shell of her former self, numb with grief. The rest of the family was a mix of conflicted emotions. Relief that the source of so much trouble was gone, warred with a genuine sadness for Mrs. Lin's loss and the lingering anxiety about what the future held. They knew Mrs. Lin had no one else to truly care for her in her old age. Because Lan was adopted, the family refused to allow her to be buried in the front yard with the ancestral graves. Mrs. Lin, in her grief-stricken state, insisted on burying her in the backyard of the central house, the one she herself occupied. This was unusual, unsettling, but no one dared to argue with the grieving matriarch. Days turned into weeks, and Mrs. Lin's grief morphed into a deep depression. She became withdrawn, almost catatonic. Then she suffered a series of strokes, leaving her bedridden and unable to speak clearly. On her deathbed, she could only gather enough strength to see her two brothers, Uncle Ba and Uncle Ed, one last time. The rest of the family waited outside, hearing only Mrs. Lin's anguished cries before silence fell. She was gone. During the funeral, as family members paid their final respects, something unbelievable happened. At exactly noon, Mrs. Lin's body convulsed. The lid of the coffin flew open, and she sat up, eyes wide and staring, but alive. The mourners panicked, scattering in terror. No one dared approach the coffin. After a long, agonizing wait, they cautiously looked back inside. Mrs. Lin was still there, lying in the coffin, breathing shallowly, but alive. Uncle Ba, his voice trembling, declared, She's come back." The funeral was hastily dismantled. They carried Mrs. Lin back to the house, placing her on a traditional wooden platform bed. She was unresponsive, her body still, but her breathing continued a steady, unsettling rhythm. She could only move her eyes, following people as they moved around the room. She seemed to recognize them, making a small, guttural sound when she saw a familiar face. It was clear she wasn't suffering from dementia. She knew who everyone was. News of Mrs. Lin's sudden revival spread like wildfire through the community. Some whispered that her time simply hadn't come, that the gatekeepers of the afterlife had sent her back. But when some old friends came to visit, Mrs. Lin reacted violently, her eyes blazing with fury, growling and hissing until they fled in terror. Uncle was puzzled. These were people Mrs. Lin had been close to in life. Why this sudden hostility? Mrs. Lin lay there, day after day, staring at the ceiling. She refused food and water, anything offered to her spilling from her slack mouth. The family was baffled, terrified, and utterly lost. As night fell, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy, oppressive. And then the moaning began. It escalated into screams, shrieks, and the sounds of things being smashed. The entire household was jolted awake. They found Mrs. Lin, somehow able to move, crawling out of bed and thrashing on the floor. When they offered her food, she refused, demanding specific, bizarre dishes, the kind of things Lin had loved. The family spent the entire night scrambling to find these obscure foods, only to have Mrs. Lin smash them to the floor if they weren't exactly right. She tormented them until dawn, leaving everyone exhausted and terrified. The remnants of a devoured chicken, bones scattered across the floor, were a chilling testament to her nocturnal rampage. Uncle came to check on her in the morning, and Mrs. Lin was once again immobile, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sensing something deeply wrong, he called a family meeting. "Those people she chased away yesterday," he said, his voice low and strained. "They were all people Lan hated. People she'd fought with when she was alive. People Mrs. Lin didn't defend her against." Another family member chimed in, "And the food she demanded last night, that was all Lan's favorite stuff. It's like she's possessed. So what do we do?" Someone asked, fear evident in their voice. "There's only one way to know for sure if it's Lan possessing Mrs. Lin," Uncle replied grimly. He didn't elaborate, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The family was now convinced that Lan's spirit had somehow taken over Mrs. Lin's body, but they didn't know why. Uncle Ba, taking charge, found a local spiritualist, a kind of exorcist, to come and assess the situation. The spiritualist entered the house and immediately recoiled, gagging at a foul, sickly sweet odor emanating from Mrs. Lin's body. He looked at Mrs. Lin and she glared back, her eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. The spiritualist turned and fled, shouting over his shoulder, "She's possessed by a yaksha." Lan died young, full of anger and resentment. "She's become a demon." He left without another word, leaving the family in a state of utter despair. That night, the house echoed with Mrs. Lin's wild howls. She screamed, thrashed, and smashed anything within reach. No one slept. Uncle Ba, anticipating the chaos, had locked the doors to prevent her from escaping and harming anyone outside. When the first rooster crowed at dawn, she fell silent, her body going limp, her eyes once again fixed on the ceiling. The family spent the morning cleaning up the wreckage from her nocturnal rampage. Uncle had arranged for offerings to be made at Lan's grave in the backyard, begging her spirit to leave Mrs. Lin in peace and move on to the afterlife. As soon as the incense was lit, Mrs. Lin began to sob uncontrollably in the house. No one knew what was happening. After the crying subsided, she lay still, her eyes darting around the room, watching everyone. The cycle continued. Nighttime terror, daytime stillness, punctuated by bouts of weeping. Mrs. Lin's body withered, becoming skeletal, her eyes sunken and bruised from constant crying, her teeth loose and nearly falling out. The family was falling apart. No one could work, sleep, or even think straight. Some of the women, desperate for protection, began wearing blessed gemstone bracelets, believing they would ward off evil spirits and provide some mental stability. The men, mostly skeptics, dismissed such practices. The stench emanating from Mrs. Lin's body grew increasingly unbearable. It permeated the entire estate, wafting into neighboring homes, causing complaints and demands for something to be done. The family tried to communicate with Lan to understand what she wanted, but she remained silent, only uttering guttural moans and groans. The families of Uncle Ba and Uncle Et held a tense meeting. They desperately discussed ways to end Mrs. Lin's suffering and, by extension, their own. But Mrs. Lin was already technically dead. Her heart had stopped, yet Lan's spirit was still animating her body. The idea was quickly dismissed. Uncle Ba, his face grim, offered a more brutal suggestion. What if we damage the body, make it so Lan's spirit can't control it anymore? The idea was horrifying, a violation of everything they held sacred. No one could bring themselves to consider it. The women of the family, heartbroken by Mrs. Lin's tormented state, longed to care for her, to bathe her and ease her suffering. But Uncle Ba forbade it, insisting that the entity in the bed was a yaksha, a demon, not Mrs. Lin. He feared that the women, being more vulnerable, might be possessed themselves. So they waited, day after agonizing day, hoping that the decaying body would eventually become uninhabitable for Lan's spirit. The stench intensified, attracting swarms of flies. Family members wore masks and constantly disinfected the house, trying to endure the unbearable situation. And it seemed to be working. With no nourishment, the body weakened and Lan's ability to cause chaos diminished. She lay still during the day, and at night, her struggles were confined to weak thrashing within her mosquito net. One afternoon, Annette, Uncle Ut's wife, while cleaning Mrs. Lin's room, accidentally snagged her gemstone bracelet on a door latch. The bracelet broke, scattering beads across the floor. Some rolled under the wooden platform bed. Anxious, Annette crawled under the bed to retrieve them. As she neared the bed, she noticed a strange, yellowish-black fluid dripping from the wooden planks. It smelled horrific. Looking closer, she realized that the underside of Mrs. Lin's body, the part resting on the bed, was decomposing. She screamed and scrambled out from under the bed, sobbing hysterically. That night, Lan no longer thrashed. Instead, she lay on her side, weakly repeating a single word. Hua, hua, hua. The sound echoed through the silent house, sending chills down everyone's spines. Uncle was baffled. Who or what was Hua? Annette, her skin crawling with goosebumps, finally spoke, her voice trembling. That's my name. My name is Hua. The family was stunned. Why was Lan calling out Annette's name? Annette, driven by a strange mix of fear and curiosity, felt compelled to approach Mrs. Lin. The rest of the family vehemently objected, but Annette insisted, feeling that this might be the key to resolving the nightmare. Reluctantly, they agreed. Annette slowly approached Mrs. Lin's body, the stench almost overwhelming. Mrs. Lin, her voice a raspy whisper, spoke to Annette. Does your sister have anything? Then, with great effort, she continued, Hua, Lift my head, put the pillow. I can't move. Uncle Ed immediately intervened. Let the men do it. Get out of here. Hua. But Mrs. Lin, her voice barely audible, continued, Not you, Hua. It's not Lan, it's me, Hua. She struggled to speak each word, her breath ragged and shallow. The family, hearing this, tried to pull Anna away. They were convinced it was a trick, that the demon was trying to lure Anna closer, perhaps to possess her, as the current body was clearly failing. Uncle Ba and Uncle Ut were adamant. Ignore her. Let her die. Another day passed. The body lay still, its whispers growing weaker. But Anna was haunted by the sound of her own name, a relentless echo in her mind. She felt an overwhelming urge, a compulsion, to go to Mrs. Lin. Late one gloomy afternoon, unable to bear it any longer, Anna approached Mrs. Lin's decaying body. The skin was soft, blackened, and putrid. Taking a deep breath, Anna reached out and gently lifted Mrs. Lin's head. It wobbled precariously, as if the neck bones were no longer connected to the spine. Slowly, she pulled out the pillow. It was black and soaking wet with the fluids leaking from Mrs. Lin's body. And then she saw it, stuck to the underside of the pillow, also soaked and disintegrating, was a charm, a piece of paper with strange symbols written on it. At that moment, Uncle Ba saw what she was doing and yelled, What are you doing? The entire family rushed in, witnessing the scene. Mrs. Lin gasped a few times, then lay completely still, her limbs outstretched. There was no more movement. The family members began to pray, chanting Buddhist mantras, hoping to guide both Mrs. Lin's soul and the demon to the afterlife. Suddenly, Annette screamed, her face contorted in rage, her voice deep and guttural. Everyone froze, horrified. It was clear the demon's attempt to possess a new body had been real. Annette, or rather, the entity possessing her, pointed a shaking finger at the family and roared, You hurt me! You will all pay. I am Lan. The family was paralyzed with fear. The entity, sobbing and screaming, confirmed its identity as Lan. She had died at 17, full of resentment and carrying an unborn child. Her death had been too sudden, too violent, preventing her from moving on. She had become a vengeful spirit. At her funeral, everyone had secretly rejoiced, except for Mrs. Lin, who was truly heartbroken. Lan, filled with remorse and a desperate desire to protect her adoptive mother, had vowed to stay by her side. But because she wasn't a blood relative, she couldn't find solace with the family's ancestral spirits. On Mrs. Lin's deathbed, Uncle Ba and Uncle Ut hadn't come to offer comfort or say goodbye. They had come to divide the estate. Each had prepared his own will, demanding that Mrs. Lin sign it. Neither of you will yield. You don't have to favor anyone. The youngest shouldn't keep the money. Don't you dare take it. Ba, what do you want? Mrs. Lin had refused to sign either will, instead dissolving into tears. Lan, present in the room as a spirit, had witnessed her mother's anguish. Unable to bear it, she had hastened Mrs. Lin's death, hoping to free her from the torment inflicted by her own brothers. But that wasn't the end of it. With Mrs. Lin gone, the estate would be split evenly. Uncle Ba, unwilling to accept this, had secretly sought out a spiritualist to revive Mrs. Lin, hoping to have a wandering spirit possess her body and sign his will. At this revelation, all eyes turned to Uncle Ba. Fearing that other, more malevolent spirits might take control of her mother's body, Lan had decided to possess it herself. After Auntie, the entity continued, its voice dripping with venom, possessed her body. It was me. You sought a spiritualist to curse her, didn't you? The charm under the pillow, to prevent me from speaking, you monster. You're more evil than any demon. This explained why Uncle Ba had forbidden anyone from approaching the body, allowing it to rot until it was unusable, a desperate attempt to silence Lan and destroy the evidence. As the charm became soaked and deteriorated, Lan had gradually regained her ability to speak. Seeing Aunt Ut's blessed bracelet break had given her the opening she needed to connect with Aunt Ut and finally reveal the truth. Now, in Aunt Ut's body, she unleashed her final curse. Each of you each one will face the consequences. You will all pay. Her voice cracked with a final, agonizing scream, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the possession ended. Lan's spirit was gone. Anna collapsed, sobbing, her body racked with tremors, but her own mind was back. The room was filled with a stunned silence, broken only by Aunt Ut's gasps and the faint, lingering smell of decay. The aftermath was swift and devastating. The family, already on edge, fractured completely. The truth about Uncle Ba's actions poisoned any remaining trust or affection. They held another funeral for Mrs. Lin, a proper one this time, filled with genuine grief and a profound sense of shame. But the curse, or perhaps simply the weight of their collective guilt and the consequences of their greed, began to take its toll. The family's businesses, once prosperous, crumbled. Debts piled up, forcing them to sell off land, pawn family heirlooms, and slowly dismantle the estate that had been the source of so much contention. Uncle Ba, consumed by guilt and ostracized by the family, descended into alcoholism. He became a shell of his former self, wandering the streets, muttering to himself, a living embodiment of the family's downfall. He lived a life of utter misery, a stark reminder of the price of his greed. Uncle Ut, burdened by remorse, tried to make amends. He worked tirelessly, but the weight of past actions seemed to follow him, preventing any real success. He lived a modest, quiet life, accepting his diminished circumstances as a form of karmic retribution. He focused on living a virtuous life, hoping to atone for his past mistakes and perhaps earn some good fortune for his children and future generations. As for Lan, her restless spirit, unable to find peace, continued to wander. She had never accumulated any good karma, her short life consumed by anger and resentment. She drifted, a lost soul, hoping for a chance encounter, a moment of grace that might finally allow her to move on. The Lin Estate, once a symbol of family pride and prosperity, became a crumbling ruin, a testament to the destructive power of greed and the enduring consequences of betrayal. The grand houses fell into disrepair, the vineyard overgrown and wild, the land itself seeming to mourn the family that had torn itself apart. The story of the Lin family became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, a reminder that the true horrors aren't always supernatural, but often reside within the human heart. The villagers, and those few remaining family members who hadn't fled to the cities in search of a fresh start often said that the real ghosts of the Lynn estate weren't the spirits of the dead, but the lingering echoes of their choices, the greed, the betrayal, the unchecked ambition that had consumed them all. They learned in the most brutal way possible that material wealth could never compensate for the loss of integrity, compassion, and familial love. And so the Lynn estate stood as a silent, decaying monument to a family destroyed not by a vengeful spirit, but by their own flaws. It was a stark reminder that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the bonds of family, the strength of character, and the pursuit of a life lived with honesty and kindness. The haunting wasn't about a ghost seeking revenge, but about the consequences of human actions, a chilling lesson etched into the very foundations of the crumbling estate. The real horror wasn't the yaksha, but the darkness that had taken root in the hearts of the living. The tale of the Lynn estate fades into the shadows, leaving behind a chilling echo of human frailty. Remember, dear listeners, that true horrors often reside not in the supernatural, but in the choices we make, the bonds we break, and the darkness we harbor within. May the story serve as a reminder that the most terrifying hauntings are those we inflict upon ourselves. Sleep well, if you can, and may the specters of the Lynn estate leave you undisturbed. Tonight, as you close your eyes, ask yourself, are there any ghosts lurking in your own soul, waiting to rise? And if there are, do you have the courage to face them? Don't forget that sometimes the most terrifying demons do not come from the other world, but from the very corners of our hearts.
Is it the wind?